Hey guys, it's 007 here, and we're going to finally talk about the Ground Forces Nations Survey. Now, I know it's taken a while for me to do this video here, and ultimately I figured we could head it off now. Now, I'm going to put some forewarnings here regarding the survey. Now, this was done before the Italian tech tree was even mentioned before its release. Obviously, this being done now, Italy is currently in the game, along with the Rank 6 jets, so any of this stuff that talks about Italy or Rank 6 jets has no premise whatsoever of what the current Italy faction is, what it is now. So I just wanted to put that out as a forewarning and just talk about it right currently. So obviously I created the survey back in, I want to say, November. Created in November so that way I could identify what specifically, you know, there were some questions that I had, and I wanted people from the War Thunder community to step forward, answer the questionnaire, to give me what the War Thunder player view was. Now, it was very nice when people, I went to different servers, they were very polite, those that agreed to help and all that. Some were not so polite, I'm not going to mention their names, it's not in my interest, I don't want to give them a time of day. But for those that did participate, it was very much a big help. So let's just start. First question was, what nations do you consider more developed in your ground forces account, on your account? And an overwhelming group of people put Germany, followed by USA and USSR. Now, this was not surprising to me. I had figured that these were the top 3 nations that would show up on the list. And ultimately we'll get down to that conclusion here later on. But surprisingly, in 4th place, though, Britain was the next developed nation, with 8 people saying, you know, they figured Britain was one of their most developed nations in their account, which is very interesting. But we'll continue to move on. And there are some comments here and all that. You can look at the comments. I'm not going to primarily hit them unless they primarily give a good view and some explanations to why what it is. So here's a development question about what nations people are currently developing. USA was an overwhelming number at the time, followed by Germany, Russia, UK. Japan had a high development count as well. That was very, very interesting. But France was falling around from the rear. And I think I might have a video explaining why that might be the case. So comments there, nothing really to say. So what ground forces nations would you consider to be the major nations? This one did not shock me at all. And it was interesting watching the votes come in. I never talked with anyone about really what was going on and what, you know, the results were, because I wanted a non-biased, you know, result. I was the only one holding the information. And watching the information come in was really neat for this. And ultimately it came to the same result, effectively describing the developed nations. It pretty much paralleled it. And it's very unique. You have all these different these different people come forward and say USA, Germany, and USSR were the primary nations of the game. And it's very unique to see that, because we look at things like, say, the helicopters in the game. These are the only 3 nations currently in the game right now, even before the Italians were introduced, even before Rank 6 aircraft were introduced. USA, Germany, USSR were the 3 nations, and this is what brought me to this question was, you know, what do we consider the 3 primary nations in this game? In reality, I don't think we can escape there are going to be primary nations in this game. But the idea that these 3 nations currently have all the cards in their hand. And people might say, well, Germany doesn't have Rank 6 air. Well, Britain doesn't have helicopters. So, you know, don't even get started with me. I could light a whole bunch of stuff up, considering, you know, a debate whether or not what nations have what and what they lack. Right now, Japan should be fully equipped, but they've been pretty much shut down. And also another I should also talk about this warning. We never really talk about naval forces. I want to keep naval forces out for a little bit longer. I don't want to make a comment on them until we see a bit more development, because I can't really make a good conclusion on the whole story because I don't really have the full picture available to me. But moving on, look back to the Ground Forces Nations survey. Here were the responses for this. It was interesting. They said that the Soviets and the Germans were the best nations for ground, and I kind of agree with that, considering the equipment that they're given and their overall tech tree being better. And I'm not debating BRs right now. BRs would be something that would probably we could go on for hours on about, but ultimately their equipment overall has an easier time fighting the enemy. That's simply what I can say. From rank 1 to rank 6, they have a very, very easy time. And as playing Soviet and German forces from rank 1 to 6, I think I could stand by that statement, definitely. So this was the fresh question, which was, okay, if these nations were added or could possibly be added, would you develop them? And I was really surprised, and I wish I could have had a progression, like pictures progressionizing the voting, because the voting really spoke really interesting terms about this. Obviously, seeing this right here, we had Italy, Sweden, and China as the suggested nations. Now, I'd seen Italy was obviously known to be in this game. They had ground forces, their premiums were in the game for a while. But the extended element was Sweden was a suggested nation when European Canadian talked about it, and other people have been talking about it before then, but he really sat down and did a discussion about it. And then we have China here. That was an additional discussion brought up by European Canadian. And I can see why you would want to put China in the game, because there's no one really fighting for the Warsaw Pact except the Russians. Now, obviously there were more nations than just Russia in the Warsaw Pact, but ultimately the doctrine was the same. And I can see why China could be stated, because it has somewhat similar doctrine, somewhat similar politic arrangement. Obviously they're not exactly best of friends, but the bigger thing is with China, and I figured this one was going to happen. Obviously there's before I talk about why, but the two nations, China and Russia, are similar, yet they have a slight difference. But my thing was, I don't think the slight difference is enough to convince people to go down that tree. Like, when I was playing World of Tanks, people went up to me and asked me why I wouldn't develop the Chinese tech tree. And I flat out told them, it's a waste of time. Why would I develop something that I already have? Why would I waste time and resources developing a country that's pretty much a clone copy, doctrine-wise? And in some cases worse and better, yeah. There's a toss-up in some aspects. But why would I do that? Why would I waste the time? It would make no sense. And ultimately, that's why China never really got developed in my World of Tanks account. I only developed it because I lost a bet. And that's about it. So, to see what people said right here, people wanting to be really interested in China and develop it rapidly, not so much. Obviously, people were about a fair rate. But Sweden had high marks. People wanted a country like Sweden. And what's interesting about Sweden is, for the most part, its early nation tech tree is, it's somewhat, stolen from other countries, or it's developed. It's homegrown, which is good. We need homegrown stuff in this game. That's realistic. That's the caveat to that. But Sweden got really radical with their development during the Cold War. And I think I would be excited for them. Once they were added in World of Tanks, I was ready for them. I wanted the Sturv 103. And I'd be curious. That's probably another video to talk about. But I would be curious how they would develop the 103 into this game if they ever did pursue Sweden as a nation. They might do a combo nation realistically. But I don't think there's much I could say. That would probably require another video. We're just going to move on from here. Person wanted Finland. I'd probably see Finland in the multinational tech tree if they come up with one. Now, here was one that I had came up with, resulting, and it parallels the major nations survey, but it really shocked me. Would a lack of an air force of helicopters for a nation make you not want to pursue ground forces in the nation? And an overwhelming people, 60% pretty much, said no. A lack of helicopters or air power would not, force me out. For me, having air power is a big determinant whether or not I'll play that nation. Being able to support my ground forces and have something that can change the game or corral the enemy air force is a big deal to me. Something that can provide strikes and support my friendly units. And I was shocked at the statistic here. And to be honest, that, it speaks more about me, and it speaks a lot about the game of War Thunder, the people that play it. Some people just play ground forces to play ground forces. They don't really care about the air power. And to be honest with you, I'm not so upset with that. It's just I'm shocked that they would take on that attitude of air power is a secondary worry to me. I'm more worried about ground forces. If there's no air power, so what? I have my tanks. It's very interesting. And the additional comments here. And it's interesting. I don't know what this question was coming from. But, there you go. Ground is for playing ground. So, do you think priorities lie with improving or adding current ground forces in the game? For nations in the game? That was a big one. And once again, we had about a 60%er reply with ground forces were the priority in the game. And remember, this is before the rank 6 aircraft was even mentioned. And people overwhelmingly said they wanted the ground forces situation to be fixed. I couldn't agree more. But ground forces being as popular as they are, the air forces needed help. And that's ultimately why I think rank 6 aircraft got kicked into the picture alongside Italy. They kind of stole the show a little bit, not going to lie, with Italy. And although Italy is definitely a force to reckon with in this game, and it's obviously debatable that it's broken part of the game in regards to some models not hull breaking properly, such as the Centauro. People will still play the tanks even if they are broken because, maybe they just lack the interest or the decency of playing a vehicle when it's underpowered or overpowered. They just play it because they want to beat the hell out of anyone else. But we'll move on to the comments down below. So, air power needed massive overhaul. I kind of agree. The air powers were getting extremely stagnant when it came to fighting technology and ground forces that were decades younger. Decades younger. We're seeing 50s aircraft trying to do ground attack against 80s and 90s equipment. Absolutely, what a disaster. I mean, talk about the first Gulf War. Iraqi military units using 50s, 60s, and 70s technology against 1980s technology. Talk about one-sided. We're talking 4 decades here in some cases, with the equipment we have in game. Absolutely insulting. And air power needs to be developed. And I'm a little bit hesitant to see how far they're going to go with air power, because I feel like they're going to go loose cannon, and we're going to see F-22s in this game, which I don't want science fiction in this game. When they don't know the characteristics of these vehicles, that starts creating issues in the game. But yeah, mostly improving stuff. Adding stuff is nice. Priorities lie with improving the game in general. Air forces and ground forces. Rating and physics models. Yeah, I would agree with that. And here are some of the suggestions for the survey. Now to explain this was my first survey that I had ever done, and I was pretty happy with the way it turned out. The stuff that people answered, the results were very, very neat. No one talked with anyone about what it was, what was going on. The survey was completely, anonymous in its element. No one knew what was going on, really. People were putting stuff in, and ultimately the results came out in a way that was just really unique and uniform. Yeah, obviously we had some information there. Yeah, cool survey, yeah. Cool, I like candy. I like that comment the most. But yeah, if you guys thought this survey was pretty neat, you know, I'm definitely up for looking into more stuff. I'd be willing to talk about naval forces, and I'd be even willing to talk about air forces and put a questionnaire out and see where the direction of the game, where the players think it should go, and what their current opinion about the situation is. And yeah, I honestly have some questions already ready to go. It just, you know, does this interest you guys, and do you think that it's helpful to understanding what the player base is looking at and what they're thinking? I'm not saying whether it's right or not, but I'm saying it's just unique to see what people think about the game, and that's ultimately what needed to come out. A lot of questions were answered the way I expected them to, but a lot of questions came out with answers that I couldn't even imagined, you know, would have had the results they did. But I'm 007. We just did the Ground Forces Nation survey, the first survey on this channel. If you guys would like to see more, please answer with the voting window in the upper right hand corner, and that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully you guys get back to me with your answers.